Have you ever finished a completely normal breakfast? 2 eggs, toast, maybe a drink beside it, and somehow felt worse an hour later instead of better? Not energized, but slower. Heavier, like your body was struggling to wake up instead of starting the day. Many people over 60 quietly notice this happening. The blurry focus later in the morning, the strange afternoon crashes, the hunger that returns too quickly even after eating. And what's confusing is that these are often the same foods they've eaten for decades without problems before. But after 60, the body can react very differently to certain breakfast combinations. And surprisingly, eggs themselves may not be the issue at all. In fact, some seniors notice steadier mornings after making one tiny change around the eggs, not removing them completely. Because what may quietly exhaust the body every morning has less to do with the eggs, and more to do with what's happening beside them on the plate. For decades, eggs were considered one of the simplest, safest breakfasts you could eat. And for many people, they still are. But something changes after 60 that most people never really get told about. It's not just what you eat anymore, it's what you eat with it. Picture this: 2 eggs on the plate, but also white toast with butter, maybe crispy hash browns on the side, a glass of orange juice, and a sweet cup of coffee to start the day. It feels normal, even comforting, but an hour later something strange happens. Energy drops instead of rising, focus becomes fuzzy, and suddenly the body feels like it's asking for more food, even though breakfast just finished. Many older adults blame aging for this. But often, it's not aging alone. It's how quickly certain morning foods push the body into a rise and fall energy pattern that feels like exhaustion by mid-morning. What most people never realize is that it's not just what's on the plate, it's how quickly the body has to process it after 60. You might sit there enjoying your breakfast, 2 eggs, toast, maybe fried potatoes, feeling completely normal in the moment. Nothing seems wrong at all, but then something subtle begins to change later. Not immediately, but an hour or 2 after eating. Energy doesn't just dip, it feels like it slowly drains out of the body. Focus becomes a little harder to hold. Simple tasks feel slightly heavier than they should, and the strange part is, most people don't connect this to breakfast at all. They assume it's just aging, or maybe they didn't sleep well. But when this pattern repeats day after day, the body can start living in a cycle of quick energy rise followed by an even quicker crash, quietly shaping how tired and unfocused the entire day feels without any obvious warning. This is where things start to change. And interestingly, it has nothing to do with removing eggs completely or following strict diets. In fact, most people overlook it at first because it feels almost too simple. The real shift happens in what the body is paired with in that first meal of the day. Think about 2 eggs on a plate. If they're eaten alone or with fiber-rich vegetables, the body processes them in a much steadier way. But when they sit beside fast-digesting foods like white toast, sweetened coffee, or sugary drinks, the morning can feel completely different an hour later. Not immediately, but gradually, energy starts to slip. Focus feels less stable. And the surprising part is how noticeable the difference becomes once this small change is made. Some people describe mornings as feeling lighter and more predictable instead of that sudden rise and crash feeling. But there's one more hidden habit in the morning routine that can quietly undo even these improvements without most people realizing it. And this is where things start to quietly shift inside the body without most people noticing at first. Because after 60, it's not just the food itself, it's how certain breakfast combinations interact once they're all inside the system together. Picture a simple morning plate. Eggs, white bread, maybe a spoon of jam, and a cup of sweet tea. It feels normal. Comfortable, nothing unusual at all. But for some seniors, something subtle begins afterward. Not right away, but a little later in the morning. The body doesn't feel as smooth as it should. Energy doesn't stay steady. And over time, this pattern repeats so often that it becomes normal without even realizing it. That's why many people say something like, "I haven't changed my diet, so why does my body feel different now?" And the strange part is, it rarely comes from a single food. It comes from how the same breakfast is combined every single day without thinking about what it's doing inside the body. But what most people completely miss is the morning habit that quietly cancels even these small improvements. Now here's where things become a little more serious. Because when the same kind of breakfast is repeated every morning, the body doesn't just react once and forget it. It slowly starts adjusting to it in the background. And at first, there's nothing obvious to notice. No pain, no alarm, just small changes that are easy to dismiss. Maybe you wake up and your joints feel a little stiffer than before. Maybe your fingers take a few extra seconds to feel fully normal in the morning. Nothing dramatic, just slightly different than it used to be. Most people don't think much of it. They assume it's simply aging. But what's actually happening for many seniors is that the same morning patterns are being repeated so consistently that the body begins treating them as normal. Not harmful, just the new normal. And that's why these early signals are so easy to ignore. Because they don't feel like a problem yet. Until one day, they quietly become your everyday baseline without you even noticing when the change really started. And this is where most people get quietly misled, without anyone realizing it. Because when seniors wake up feeling stiff or a bit uncomfortable, the first thought is almost always the same. It's just age. And at first, that explanation feels reasonable enough to accept. But what's often overlooked is that morning stiffness doesn't always start in the morning. For many people, it's actually the body reacting to what happened the day before, especially repeated patterns that quietly affect how the system settles overnight. The confusing part is that the stiffness often fades once you start moving. A few steps, a bit of activity, and suddenly things feel better again. So naturally, it gets ignored. But here's the key detail most people miss. Feeling better after movement doesn't mean the issue was never there. It simply means the body has temporarily switched on again after a slow, overnight buildup that went unnoticed. And that's exactly why this cycle continues for years, without most people ever questioning it. Now at this point, you might be wondering, if these morning patterns are really influencing how the body feels over time, then what actually helps break that cycle in a natural way? And interestingly, the answer isn't something complicated or extreme. In fact, it often comes down to very simple foods that most people already know, but rarely think about in this context. Take spinach, for example, and another is bottle gourd or lauki. On their own, they don't feel special at all. They're common, everyday foods. But when they become a regular part of the diet, especially alongside breakfast habits, something subtle starts to shift in how the body feels over time. Mornings don't feel as heavy. That slow stiffness after waking up doesn't feel as sharp. Energy feels a bit more stable instead of fluctuating quickly. Not overnight changes, but a gradual return to balance. And that's the part most people miss. It's rarely about adding something dramatic. It's about quietly supporting the body with simple patterns it can actually respond to. And before we finish, there's something really important you need to understand. When people talk about arthritis or joint stiffness, the first thought is usually that the body is simply wearing out with age, like something inside has started breaking down permanently and there's nothing left to do about it. But that's not always the full picture. For many seniors, what feels like aging pain is often the result of long-term daily patterns that slowly shape how the body feels over time. The important part is, this doesn't happen suddenly. It builds so quietly that most people only notice it when morning stiffness becomes part of their routine. But here's what's actually hopeful. Your body is always responding. Every morning, every meal, every small habit is sending signals it reacts to in its own way. And that means the story is not fixed. Because the real question is not just why mornings feel different now. It's what would start to change if those small daily triggers were gently adjusted, starting from tomorrow.